Welcome to A Little Better Podcast. My name is Brad. I'll be your host today. And together, me, Jason, Drew, we're going to talk about, is hanging out with sinners really a good idea? And how can we be welcoming as a church without compromising the truth? Well, remember, our goal on this podcast is to know Jesus better and by the power of His Spirit do better, so together we can be a little better. Well, welcome to the podcast, A Little Better, where we have Jason joining us and Drew back in the saddle, preaching a great message, kicking off a new series, A Church That. So, listen, Drew, Sermon in 60. You got a recap for us.
Yep, here we go. We start a new series. This is the church that we want to be, so we're looking forward to being, and it starts with us becoming something. So not only is this like a group message, it's an individual message, and we talked about a church that is family. And so what does that mean? It means three things: a place to belong, a place to believe, and a place to become. And so we want to give people a safe environment where they can come as they are and belong. And we see that in Jesus. We see that in the God creating us in the image of God and creating us to belong in community. And we want to learn to believe. So even though you can belong before you believe, the best thing we can do is teach you about Jesus and the truth. And when we get grasp the truth, we become more like Christ. And that's the end goal of our church, to be like Christ. 44 seconds. Just
yeah, you got like 15 more seconds if you want to add some stuff. But in the spirit of adding stuff, so I always ask, I mean, the clock is a cruel master up there. Anything else you would have said if you had had more time? Anything you left on the table?
You know, I don't necessarily think there's a ton that I'm leaving on the table. It's more of nuancing things. I think that's the big thing with the clock is I would love to have more time to nuance things, say a couple more things that might bring clarity or ease some tensions. But I will say I have never, and I've been in ministry, let's see, wow, it's been a while. I may be going on like 13 to 15 years. I can't think, man, I'm getting old. I am. 4 kids later.
You're ready to leave the church, I think.
Well, let's not go that far. I've never had anybody complain that I was shorter than longer. Yeah. So, yeah, I think leave people wanting more rather than wishing they had too much.
Yeah, but I do think that nuance is a good point, right? There are so many things that people, they challenge the way we've always thought or done it, and it's just like, really? And then the question is like, is that okay? Like, for instance, is it really okay to hang out with sinners? Isn't that a bad idea if I'm spending all my time hanging out with these people? Aren't there a lot of proverbs and a lot of scripture verses about being careful who your friends are and who influences you? It just seems like
he who walks with the wise becomes wise, but a companion of fools suffers harm. And we just talked about that, last week in the sermon too, the foolish man and the wise man. So there's some wisdom there.
So do you want to retract what you said, or is that?
Yeah, I think there's a balance in everything, margin in everything, right? So I think we should be doing both, right? I think we should have a core of Christians that surround us, that keep us strong, that hold us accountable. But if we do that at the expense of hanging out with lost people, what's the purpose of it, right? And so I think what I try to do in my life is I try to have a core small group of people who influence me and hold me accountable. And then I have a wide group of people that I'm trying to influence. And so I play football on Saturday nights with a bunch of guys who I would love to see come to our church and come to know Jesus, who are far from God. And so I hang out with them, I would say at least once a week. Sometimes I have them over my house. I try to build relationships with them. But I'm not leaning on them to steer my life. I'm trying to impact their life no, they have impact on me. They teach me things sometimes that I need to learn. But they're not the core that holds me accountable and pushes me towards the cross.
Yeah, I love that, both ends. Any thoughts there, Jason?
Yeah, I feel like one question that comes to my mind is this tension. If you are a follower of Christ, is it okay for your best friends, your closest relationships, to be people who don't follow Jesus? Or is that going to end up leading you in the wrong direction? And I think there's some probably tensions there. If you grew up with people, and you've been best friend since you were 4 years old in school all together. There's a relationship that you'd have there over a lifetime. You might have your family might not be, your biological family, they might not be followers of Jesus, and yet you've got close relationships, whether good or bad, you are very close to them. But I think there is something to be said that if you follow Jesus, if you worship Jesus, then there's a connection that you have with another follower of Christ, a level of intimacy that you cannot have with someone who does not worship Jesus. And I think it would be hard if your closest relationships aren't people who also worship and follow Jesus too.
Yeah. And I think, if we wanted to push back on that, someone might say, well, my best friend is Jesus, and I think there's some truth to that. The closest relationship you need to have is your walk with Christ, right? And out of that, everything flows. But I would totally agree with that. I think you can have best friends that are non-believers. You just can't have only non-believers be your closest friends, right? You can have close friends that are non-believers, but you need to have a group of people who believe the same thing and will help you when you need help, and so.
Yeah. I think it's definitely both and I think it's hard, right? I think it's, so for instance, some of my closest, friends who hold me accountable in my walk, one thing they're holding me accountable is, am I living a pray, invest, invite lifestyle? Who am I reaching out to? And it's just like they keep me, engaged in that. But I can tell sad stories of times where I did succumb to temptation, and it was under the influence of people that I would tell everyone, oh, these are people I'm trying to reach. But, so I think prayer, that accountability, counsel. One thing I see kind of shift from the Old Testament to the New Testament, it seems to me a little bit, is that whole idea in the Old Testament, don't touch anything that's unclean, because it's going to make you unclean, right? If you mix clean water and dirty water, you've got 2 glasses of dirty water.
It's true.
Yeah. But then here's Jesus, and he touches the unclean thing. He doesn't get dirty. He makes the unclean thing clean, right? He mixes those 2 glasses of water. Now we have 2 glasses of clean water.
Well, so I think it's important, though, as we study Jesus, to recognize we aren't Jesus and our limitations in our flesh. I think that's the guard you have to have is, I want to be like Jesus, but I also have to recognize I am not Jesus. So he has the ability to hang out with lost people all the time and not succumb to the temptation. If we do that, we will. Like, our flesh is that strong. So we have to have a lot more protection than Jesus did. And so I think it's to nuance that and understand that is important.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm thinking out loud now is, I think we can think that you could have the wrong thought that if I'm a follower of Jesus, then my only close relationships should be believers. But I do think when God talks about being created for community, part of that's just relational connection. Believer or unbeliever, like, we're designed to be in relationship with other people. I was reading a book we read as a group staff, and many of our staff have read, called Created for Community by Andy Stanley. They just had a recent copy of it come out. And they're talking about Genesis 2:18, and in talking about that, they made the point, and I think maybe they're quoting another author, that you talked about Jesus being your best friend. Like, we can easily say, like, the only relationship you need is God, and if all you have is God, then that is true. And I think, well, that is true. Jesus, or God, right in that passage says, here's Adam and Eve, or here's Adam walking with God. All he has is God, and God says, it is not good that man is alone. So, well, we could say it is true to a degree that all we need is God. When Adam only had God, God said, you need more. You need a relationship with another person. So I think we can find that with believers and unbelievers.
Yeah, and I think there's truth in both of those statements. All you need is God is true, but it's not optimal, right? It's not the best case scenario, right?
Good.
If you're lost on a desert island and you're all by yourself, God is all you need. He is, but none of us live that way, right? And so what's optimal is exactly what you said, and I love that point. Like, he walked with God. Like, he dwelt with God,
fall,
right? This is
no
before
sin.
the fall. And God still says, this is not good. And so that's a great point.
Yeah, I loved your discussion of, if you're not a little uncomfortable with the people walking through the door, maybe you're not doing it right. And it really challenged me personally. I literally thought of the 10 neighbors I have on both sides of the street around me. 9 of those neighbors, I know all their names. They know my name. There's one neighbor, 1 out of the 10, I never talk to them, never introduce them. They're loud. They're crazy. It's, the police have arrived. It's just like, and I was just, why am I not connecting with them? I keep those people, at a distance. Sure. Now, I don't know their whole story, right? It could be a really, I don't know what their struggles are. I don't know what their challenges are, what they're facing in life, because I haven't connected with them. But I was just reminded of the people I do keep at a distance that I don't naturally connect with. How do we reverse that?
Yeah, that reminds me of there's a book. My wife and I, we bought our first house right before COVID, moved in, and as I was painting the house before we moved in, I was listening to the book "The Gospel Comes with a Housekey" by Rosaria, Butterfield, and they talk how their house is like an open, book. Like you come in any time of the day, anybody, no matter your lifestyle, no matter your circumstances, no matter what neighbor, they can come in and they're going to see them living their life, folding their laundry, eating food together, with the mess of their life and the goodness of their life. But they talked about how they had this one neighbor who everyone else whispered about, like, this person's, they're probably dealing drugs. They had this dog that was rough and like nobody liked the dog. It was kind of a dangerous dog. And one day the dog went missing. And so they helped this man, this neighbor that no one liked, to find this dog, and that began to kindle a relationship that they were able to build with this guy. And it made me think of that even as I go around our neighborhood, that there's some families that are really easy to connect with. They're friendly, maybe they look like me, or they talk like me, or they have kids in my same stage of life, or whatever it is, or they're just nice people, and so I want to be friends with them. But then there's the people who their yard is messy, or they are loud, or there's they're blaring their car when they come in, and everyone talks about them. And I'm like, am I reaching out to them too?
Yeah, and again, I think that comes back to a point that I made is, we talk about how you see somebody, right? And what oftentimes we don't see in people is image bearers of God, right? We see the dysfunction. We see the annoyance. We see the inconvenience. We don't see the image of God. And I think theologically and fundamentally, it's so important for me to constantly remind myself, that person, whether I like them or not, how annoying they are or not, they are an image bearer of God. And it is my responsibility. It is the great commission and the great commandment out of my love for God to love that person, despite who they are, despite all the things, because they carry God's image. And I think one first step is just refreshing my mind, renewing my mind of that perspective over and over and over again.
Yeah, I think every church believes they're friendly, believes they're welcoming, right? You almost need that disinterested party, third person to come in and say, I didn't feel that welcome.
Well, and not even just welcoming. Like, okay, what does welcoming mean, right? Okay, does that mean we have greeters that smile and say, oh, thanks for coming? Or does it mean, like, I think a big part of welcoming is what goes on that's not seen. So what I mean by that is when someone who walks in the door that, let's say, probably doesn't feel like they belong, is not being judged in everybody else's mind, right? Like, oh, hey, welcome here. Why is that person here? Oh my word. This is, some of, like, welcoming is a culture. It's a culture of not only action, but of attitude. So when you get the action of welcoming and the attitude of welcoming, I think that's when you become a welcoming church, where it's just like, I don't care who shows up to this church. Yeah. I am so fired up that they're here.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I loved what you talked about in your message, how at the end you talked about as we individually become, then our church becomes. So it doesn't matter what our staff puts on or what like programs or strategy we have. Like we can have all these things lined up, but each of us individually has to be a welcoming relationship. And so we have groups that sometimes aren't healthy, or we, as this, on staff, like we're blowing it all the time. Like we didn't follow up with the person we were supposed to, or we weren't a good friend to someone in our group. We weren't there for them when they needed us. Like we blow it, all the time.
For sure.
And so as a church together, as we try to do what's right, then we can be a family. But no church is perfect. We're all blowing it.
What's
at a
cool
time.
about the illustration of a hydrangea, right? If you look at a hydrangea and you talk about blooms, what I love about a hydrangea bloom is it looks like one bloom, but it's made up of a bunch of different flowers.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's almost a beautiful picture of the church is, each bloom makes up that cone of the bloom. And it's, you're right, that's us, right? That's if we are all welcoming, our bloom is way more beautiful. But even just a brown spot on a big bloom can make the flower not look as appealing.
Yeah. I think, attitude trumps action all the time, like you said. And I think that idea of when people walk in the door, do they smell judgment or do they smell grace?
Yeah.
If we're broken people, right? I mean, our only merit is that Jesus loved us. We were sinners, we're broken to the cross. And your brokenness may look different than my brokenness, but I'm still broken. And probably the ways I'm broken are a little even more offensive to God, right? I mean, the good show, the good name, the reputation. I mean, those things can be horribly offensive to God. But what do people smell when they walk in the door?
Well, that's why I like that statement, a church that is a hospital for sinners, not a country club for Christians. I mean, a lot of people will push back on that statement and be like, wait, isn't the church for believers, right? But really, just because I'm a believer or a Christian doesn't mean I'm not a sinner. Right. And I still need to go back to the hospital for healing. And that's what I like about that is, man, the grace of Jesus covers my sin ultimately, but I still battle with it every single day and need a hospital to go to of people, a group of people, a body of believers that will say, hey, let me walk with you through this part, this dysfunction, so you can become more like Christ.
I think a lot of us walk into the doors of our church on Sunday morning, and even though we don't have a dress code, like people dress up. We try to, for the most part, try to look nice, or we have our best level of looking nice for us, on Sunday. And so people can feel like, oh, am I really one of these people? And I think one of the environment, we're talking about groups, like when you walk in a group and when people are authentic, people are like, oh, I'm not the only one. Like I struggle with this too, or your marriage, like you're struggling with that too, or this is like I was talking to Drew and Nate Bannell yesterday. We had a meeting and all of our families were doing the same homeschool co-op. So we were talking like, oh wow, this is rough, this is hard. As we're trying to manage that, and so to see like we're identifying with other people, like life isn't perfect, and we've got things we're working through.
Your kids scream uncontrollably too. I feel welcome here.
Only your kids, right?
Yeah, I'll just play a video, right? Every day in the life of my family.
Yeah.
Oof.
Hey, so you said one of the most loving things we can do is tell the truth. So I think that was it. So we spent a lot of time in the sermon on belong, which I loved. I also love that it comes first before believing, that people can belong without believing. Still, I think that's something I'm still trying to work out in my head.
Yeah.
Right? But there is believe. And you said one of the most loving things we can do is tell the truth. Why is it so hard to tell people, the truth? Or why do we think those are incompatible? Or, I mean, I'll tell this story. I led a friend to Christ years ago, and one of the first things he said is, what kind of monster would I be not to share this with other people? So and that's always challenged me, because there's plenty of people I haven't shared with, right? I'm not doing as much as I can, but anyway, I have a question in there, but that's just that
I think there's
observation.
tensions, right? Like, one, are they ready for the truth, right? It's not that I don't want to share it, but I want to share it, not that there's a bad time to share the truth, but there's a bad way to share the truth. And some of that is timing. It's relationship. It's, if it was just that easy, we'd all just stand on the corner and yell the truth out. And, that's not the way it works. It's so there's a lot of ingredients that are in that recipe. Now, when it comes to like a Sunday morning, we're always going to share the truth. That is our platform. But when it comes to like me and my relationships with my football guys or whatever, I'm waiting for that moment where the Spirit is saying to me, now's the time. Right. Yeah. Now's the time. And I don't know if he's not going to write that on the clouds, but it's being sensitive to the Spirit. It's being sensitive to that relationship. Where is that person? Are they interested in the truth? Are they asking questions? And so I think there's no right recipe of how to share the truth, but it's circumstances and it's listening to the Spirit of God.
Yeah. It's such it feels like a dance. There's so much wisdom and maturity involved, which again reminds me of, I just love hanging out with people who do it well. And so, hey, come to church, join a community group. We're helping and encouraging each other. There's some great examples. I just think of Scott Bixby, who's lived an evangelistic lifestyle all his life. I had a friend, actually my brother-in-law was a pastor, said, I don't think I know anyone who's led more people into the kingdom than Scott. He and what does that look like? Well, then you hang out with people and you see the way they love people. You see the way they.
Well, look at Jesus, right? So if you look at Jesus' stories, not all the stories of interactions with people, he led them to the truth the same way, right? So you have, the woman who is going to get stoned, and he tells everybody, hey, if you don't have sin, so he has grace with her. But then the woman at the well, he still has grace with her, but he's like, you have 5 husbands. He literally just calls her lifestyle out. And, there's so many stories where Jesus healed many people to take them to the truth. He did miracles to bring people to himself so he could declare the truth. He also told people that he knew might not accept the truth, hey, if you want to follow me, it's gonna be hard. Pick up your cross, eat your flesh. So he did this beautiful, delicate dance of many ways of declaring the truth.
I think quoting Andy Stanley again. Do you want to make a point or do you want to make a difference?
Yeah.
And so I think we all fall in the lines of a truth teller or a grace, person. I find myself probably more often I just want to build relationship, connect with people, and I'm waiting for the right moment to share something that is hard, and I can probably overweight, which is not helpful for them. We just had, a family that we were connecting with for a few years, hoping for the right time to share the gospel with them, and then found out they had to move, so I'm like, man, I had, built, 2 years to build a relationship without sharing the gospel. Thankfully, the night before they left, they came over to our house, we had dinner together, and we were able to talk about the gospel. But I would have loved to have more conversations about that. So there's a time, when you wait too long. And I love, as a church, that we are going to not hold back from teaching the truth at the same time as wanting to be a place that you're welcome here, even if you disagree with us.
I think indirectly is a good way to, and what I mean by that is let's say Jason is my friend, and I'm trying to preach the gospel, rather than saying you need the gospel, I like to say, look what the gospel has done in my life. Look, this is how Jesus, my belief in him I feel like that's an indirect way to share the need of the gospel in a positive way versus a negative way. Versus hey, you are a sinner and you need Jesus in your life. Yeah. I want to show you I was a sinner, and look what Jesus did for me. And it's this indirect way of declaring the truth of the gospel that isn't so intimidating or it turns people off.
Yeah. I think this is, my wheels are spinning. There's so many ways I think of how I need to do this better. And I also think we're talking about grace and truth. Jesus was full of grace and truth. And it's easy to be one or the other, but there is something that I think that's the Spirit. It's not I'm going to hang on to both, but there is something when God works in our lives that the truth and grace are the same thing and they come out, right? The truth is I was a sinner. Yeah. I was deserving of judgment. I was so ashamed, and he was so loving, and he was so forgiving. And so there's that expression is full of grace and truth. Yeah.
That's where you get growth.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, how about some final thoughts here? I don't know. You mess with my life every week, every time you get up there. So final thoughts on just what do you think is your own next step? What do you think, you need to be working on from what you heard in terms of being more like the church Jesus wants us to be? Is that...
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, I know I have a neighbor who doesn't like me, and I'm not sure why. Actually, I do. It's Nate Miller's fault. He hunts on my property, and she doesn't like hunting, and she's made that very abundantly clear. So I blame Nate Miller. But I've made that excuse to not attempt to. If you don't like me, I'll just move on to somebody who does. But I haven't even tried, and I have just casted so much judgment on a woman I've never even really had a conversation with. I think that personally, that's a huge step for me. And I think, from a corporate standpoint, I just think I need to get over the judgment I have, right? I think that a lot of this welcoming, I got to get rid of the things in my mind that don't honor Christ and aren't true of his gospel.
Yeah, I feel like where am I weakest in all of this? I think it probably comes to Jesus' relationship with people who were far from him. I feel like they flocked to him. He hung out with them. I think I've got a lot of people I connect with. Maybe we'll have them over, for dinner, or we'll hang out a little bit. Sometimes I feel like it's too scattershot. I need to be just like really focused on a few people so I can go deep with them, instead of just a touch here, a touch here, a touch there. Because my life, working on staff at a church, you can be surrounded by Christians as your primary relationships, and it's hard to spend much time with people who are far from Christ. Part of our church philosophy is we're simple. We don't want to do very much because we want our church to be engaged in relationship with people who are far from Christ. And so we can't do that if we're doing a million things as a church. But I still got to be focused even, in my role, that I don't get so busy doing my job or doing church things that I'm not spending intentional, consistent relationship with a few people where I'm actually friends with them. They like hanging out with me, and in those relationships I can foster opportunities to share the gospel with them.
Yeah, I already mentioned my neighbors across the street. I mean, it's just a very concrete step to go out and even know their names. Well, listen, as I was listening to your sermon, I was thinking, I think there's a lot of wisdom here for the divisions in our culture. And then I looked ahead and saw you'll be talking about that next week.
That's right.
So everyone should join us next week where we get to go a little deeper and be a little better and talk about division in our world.